Okay, my car is a 2007 525i that was made in May, I believe. That's important. I'll show you a little bit later. I'm going to try to piece this together best I can. This started off as just doing some videos for a starter change, which turned out to be quite the job. But it actually got worse after I had the starter out and realized that the crankcase position sensor connector had snapped off. And this was a real bear trying to find a way to fix this thing, because it snapped off down here. I'll show you some pictures, video of the good connector, what it looks like. But the way it happened is in order to get to the starter, you separate the intake away. You really can't take it all off, so you spread it out. In the process of doing that, the harness for this was tight and it pulled it. It busted off down here, which it must have been fragile anyway, because it looked like it just pulled out, but it did break down at the bottom. Some of the video is going to be about for replacing the starter, but as I go along in there, I'm going to show you what I did. Because this is probably going to be the best part. Because if you have my year model car, they don't have a good fix for this. I had to splice in a new one. But at least there's something you can do out there. It just takes some soldering skills, but you can make it happen. So again, hopefully I can make it not too confusing between the starter change and this, but I'm going to do both as I go along. Alright, you want to take off, of course, all the filter housings, the bar, all the stuff in the back. Try to give you as much room as possible because it's a pretty tight area anyway, because we want to get underneath this intake housing, and the only thing we do is pull it to the side. So in order to get as much room as we can, all of that's got to come off. Little clip bar here, let's move that out of the way. There is fastener there. This just pop right out. Let's get this one tab right there, just pull up on it, and then it slides out. Alright, after the filter housing comes off, you got one fastener here, and you have 3 quarter turn fasteners here, and one in the middle. Close those two together, and the whole thing just, oops, forgot about this part here. This part just pops out. So it does. And the whole thing comes out. And the other side's same way, real easy. Alright, the next step, and like I said, I'm doing this out of order, but just trying to piece it back together in order. So obviously after the cover's off, all the bolts for the intake are pretty accessible. None of them are hard to get to. All this on the intake, the filter box, all that comes off. Okay, next part, I want to just kind of go over these crankcase vent hoses. I would suggest, if you do this job, go ahead and buy these things, because they're really brittle and they're very easy to break. And you can see it's 3 and 4, and you can see the 2 part numbers, and they're not that expensive. Alright, next video will show where they're at. I can only show video of the upper hose. The lower one is below the intake, and I just couldn't get any access to it good enough with the camera. But I don't know if you could take it off with the intake still attached. It may be possible, but it'd be very difficult. Okay, here's the upper hose. And back away a little bit, you can see where it's at on the back. And there again, it's just the access is just so hard to get to those clips to push them out. You can get it, but it just takes a while to get to it. And this is the lower vent hose, and man, these things are just a pain to get off. Pretty simple, you'd think, because the only thing you see are the locking tabs there. The only thing you have to do is squeeze it to unlock them. Well, it's really hard access what makes it that way, and they are sure easy to break. This one broke right down here, pretty much the same as the other one. Started off pretty sure this was a bad starter. That's still in work, but when I was getting ready to put the starter back in, if I can get this to focus a little bit better, that sensor right there, that's your crankshaft position sensor, and I found the connector was off and to the side. This is when the scary part started, after I found this broken, which you can kind of see what a good one looks like. You can kind of tell, that part of it where the seal is where it broke off at, and it broke off down inside the sensor. After I bought this adapter, I took the sensor with me just to make sure it fit. So the problem with this is that it's hardwired below the intake. So there's not a quick disconnect that I saw anywhere. So I think that's why I couldn't find a connector, because it's like you'd have to buy like the whole harness in order to get this one. I couldn't even find this at a junkyard. That's how bad it was. So I had this idea. I would just look on Google and just typed in this crankcase sensor adapter, and came across this one right there, this number. And what I was looking for is something that looked the same, and you can kind of tell that there's this adapter, which you can it's got connectors on both ends, and it does look, very similar to this one. Not that it really matters, but this is what I was telling you earlier about mine's made in May. Is that it's effective for this car, but they stopped it in February of '07. Was this the only, if I got the E60, it's not applicable to mine, but it is applicable to some of the 525s, just not mine. Figures. Alright, this is the old one that came off. See where it breaks. You see, I guess this may be typical where they do break. And this one, you can see that it kind of looks like it's a strain relief, but it's not. It is opposite from the old one, but it doesn't matter. They still slide in and lock the same way. The only thing we have to do is just match up 1, 2, and 3 to 1, 2, and 3. So as long as you keep the wires the same, that's all that matters. All right, to hopefully clarify this a little bit better, is that when you're splicing in the new connector from the adapter, the only thing that matters, like I can't remember for sure, but say for example, that's the way it's worked, is that this was 1, 2, 3, and that was 1, 2, 3. So just make sure that pin 1 on the new connector goes to the orange wire, pin 2 goes to the black with the blue stripe, and pin 3 goes to yellow. Alright, so I got the new connector put back on and spliced in. I'll get to that later, but you can tell the only way to get to this thing is when the starter's off. It's buried. Okay, got the starter in, and just a couple of things. I took this ping sensor out of the way to give me more room, and then I constantly had to kind of move this in and a little bit back out when I was working on this. Like the ping wire is a little bit too short to do if it's too far over. So, and same thing for the battery wiring. That going to the positive post right there. It's pretty tight, so you got to have it pretty close. And then it's got 2 bolts with one on the lower right hand corner, with this one in the upper back. You can kind of barely see it, it's a head point of it sticking through. It comes in from the back, and I highly recommend doing that one first. If I can get you a good shot of that one. Yeah, there it is right there. So that one I highly recommend doing first. It's a rear bolt for the starter. Hardest one to get to, but I mean it's accessible, and it'd be a lot harder to do if it was the second one. So do this one first. Okay, so I'll put back together, and it was a starter. Everything works normally now. About a month after I did the starter change, I did have problems with my IBS or battery sensor, which I'm going to make another video for that one. Realize this wasn't the best video for a starter change. There's other videos on YouTube you can watch to get more information. I mainly wanted to make this video due to the connector breaking on the crankcase position sensor. So if you're doing a starter change and you have the same problem I had about it breaking, or you have fault codes or something like that, it indicates a crankcase position sensor. It could be that connector that broke. I don't think it's uncommon for that to break. So if you come across something like that, this is a really good option to fix it, at least on my model car. If you have the cars with the adapter, great, very nice. But if you do have this one on mine, at least it's an option to do, and will definitely could save you a whole lot of money. It'll take a little while to do. It's not exactly that easy. And one part of the video I didn't show was when I spliced everything in. When all this was removed, there was some access down on this area, and that's where I pulled the harness over this way, and I did all my soldering and heat shrink in this area. And it was, yeah, kind of tight, but it's definitely doable. So anyway, hope this video helps in some way.